Hello and welcome. This is chapter number 3 of your class 11th economics NCERT. In the first two chapters, we talked about first how British had left India at the time of our independence. Second chapter took us through India's journey from 1950 until 1990. The third chapter will talk to us about the famous LPG reforms, the 1991 reforms that changed India forever. If you read about India's contemporary history, it would not be wrong to say that it is divided into two parts. One, pre 1991 India, what India stood for, what India had until 1991, and then post 1991 India. These were two very, very different nations. These were nations that had very different types of policies, very different type of government lookout towards the policies of the businesses, and very different foreign relations as well. 1991, as you know, was a watershed movement in the sense that the government introduced the famous LPG reforms, known as liberalisation, privatisation, and globalisation. In this chapter, we will be discussing each of these in detail. We will also be discussing about what was it that led India to the 1991 crisis, what was the background of it, what is it that we could have done otherwise. It is also important to remember this because recently, former Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh passed away, and one of his big legacies of his political life was the LPG reforms, because he was the finance minister of India at the time that India introduced the LPG reforms. While he was giving his budget speech of 1991, this was the famous quote that he had used. No power on earth can stop an idea whose time has come. It's a quote originally by Victor Hugo, but he had used it in his budget speech, underlining the fact that the time is right for India to open up its arms, embrace the world market, and introduce these LPG reforms. Now, the LPG reforms were a kind of a shock to the Indian market, the kind of a shock that was required because of the existing circumstances at that time. In short, India was almost out of any foreign exchange. Please understand how it works. No country in the world is self sufficient in the sense that every country has to buy something or the other from some other countries. Look at India. From our context, there are certain things that we just cannot manufacture on our own in India, so we have to buy them from outside. For example, crude oil. We import 85% of our crude oil requirements from outside. Look at weapons. Look at vegetable oil. All these items are imported by India in large numbers. Now, let's say India wants to buy something from another country, let's say China or some other country. How would India pay to them? Now, if your answer is that we would pay in our own currency, the question is why would they accept our currency? Why would China accept the Indian currency? The countries are only ready to accept a currency which is acceptable in other parts of the world as well. Like if we pay Indian rupee to China, China will only accept if that Indian rupee can be used by them to buy something else. So Indian rupee is not that internationally acceptable. The most well accepted currencies around the world are the US dollar mainly. Then we have euro, pounds, but usually the reserve currency of the world is considered as the US dollar. So every country tries to maintain a healthy reserve of US dollar along with some other things such as gold, which is universally accepted. Because in order to buy stuff from the other countries, you need to have. When you do not have this much money and you do not sell a lot of these to other countries, what will you do? Imagine a situation. If you don't have dollars, how can you earn dollars? The best way to earn dollar or the best way to earn foreign exchange for a country is to sell something to the world. This is the problem that we had. We did not sell much of the stuff to the world, so there was no way in which dollar could come into our country. Third way to earn dollar is when foreign investors, let's say from America, would invest in your country and they bring their dollar. None of that was happening in India at that time. So we had a foreign reserves crisis. We did not have enough money. In fact, it had reached a situation where we had money barely enough to buy or to have imports for 2 weeks and not more than that. Under those circumstances, we were kind of forced because of the circumstances and because of IMF to introduce a new economic policy of 1991 that opened up India's market to the entire world, which is what we will be discussing here. Let's first talk about the causes of 1991. Why is it that these LPG reforms were necessary for us to introduce? 1991 was a time which can be best described as a perfect storm. Perfect storm is a scenario where every single thing that could go wrong actually went wrong. Where every single thing that could go wrong in any way was happening in the same manner. Let me give you a few examples. For example, we had the Gulf War. Gulf War of 1990 was a war in which Iraq, led by Saddam Hussein, attacked Kuwait. The problem is, whenever any oil producing country, like Kuwait is a major oil producing country, when any oil producing country is attacked or is engaged in a war, that means they would not be able to produce oil for some time. So the oil supply in the market gets reduced. When the oil supply gets reduced, means automatically there is more competition to buy oil in the market, so the oil prices would go up. So all of a sudden the oil prices went up. There was an oil price shock. At the same time, 1991 was the time of USSR collapse. The USSR, which was India's closest ally, India's closest friend that would help us in as many ways as possible, they were feeling their own crisis. In 1991, USSR collapsed and broke up into different countries. Around the same time, as we discussed, we had our own foreign exchange crisis. All of these things meant that the timing was right and we were almost forced to introduce these reforms. If we would not have introduced these LPG reforms, India would have become the failed state and no one knows what would have happened after that. At the same time, the government expenditure was always much more than revenue. Now, this is the case even today. India has never been a revenue surplus country. We have never been a budget surplus country. We have always had fiscal deficit, meaning that India every year always spends more than what it earns. How do we manage that? We take loans from outside India, the government takes loans from within the country. So the government expenditure is usually higher than what they earn. The borrowing in itself was excessive. Government, as I said, continues to borrow. So much so that, do you know, today, out of all the money that we earn, the government has to pay 1/4 of that just in the form of interest payments. Interest of the loan that we have taken. This is the amount of loan that we have accumulated over the years. On top of that, public sector enterprises, that is the government companies, are just not earning enough revenue. We discussed in the last chapter how the public sector enterprises are under the control of the government. They were inefficient, they were not competitive enough as compared to the private sector, and that is why they could not give us the kind of results that we had hoped for. High public debt. Public debt is one problem, but on top of that, interest of the old debt that is just becoming higher and higher can actually destroy any country's economy. As I told you right now as well, 1/4 of the money that we are actually earning in revenue goes just in the form of interest payments. And that is a sad situation. All of this led to this high fiscal deficit that the country was facing at that time. The public sector enterprises, as I said earlier, the government companies were facing their own kind of challenges. Bureaucratic control, where there was no expert that were running the company, it was a bureaucrat that were running the company from their own will. Lack of accountability means even if they were not making a profit, even if they were making a loss, they were not answerable to anyone. No one could ask questions about their policy. No one could ask questions about the working of these companies. And there was absence of competition. If, for example, the government says today only BSNL will operate in the country and no other telecom operator will operate in the country. Just imagine. Would BSNL have any incentive to work harder or to improve its services? No. Because they know at the end of the day, everyone will come to buy our SIM card only because people don't have any other option. When you develop a monopoly, when you do not allow any other company in the same sector, you're essentially giving a free hand to the company, to the government company to work in whatever manner that they want without any competition, without any control or pressure from anyone. This was the situation here. In most of the sectors, the government companies had monopoly, and thus there was no incentive for them to work harder. And that is why the public sector enterprises just did not have the kind of success that we had hoped for. This is where the balance of payment crisis accentuated. Balance of payment means the difference between the import and export. India has always been a country where we import much more than what we export. We export certain stuff to the world, but that has never been more than what we import. So we have always been a trade deficit country. That means the amount of dollars, for example, that we are earning are never enough to sponsor the amount of money that we have to spend to actually get some stuff inside the country. This is where the problem starts. India has always been a major petroleum importing country that has not stopped even today. But at that point of time, since there were not many options to buy the petrol or to buy crude oil from, we had to depend upon the high rates that were offered to us in the market. Our trade deficit issue remained very high. We just did not have enough money. We just did not have enough foreign exchange to buy stuff. Foreign exchange reserves were not enough because, understand, as I told you, there are limited ways in which you can earn foreign exchange. Ultimately, we can't print our own dollars. So if you have to earn foreign exchange, either you have to sell stuff which the other countries would buy and give you foreign exchange in return, or you would have to attract investments, investors would have to come to your country, or you can also earn money in the form of remittances. Means Indians who are working abroad, they send money back home. Now, this was not the case earlier. As of today, last year, for example, in 2024, India had the largest amount of remittances sent back home among any countries in the world. India is the only country which received over $100 billion of remittances from Indian diaspora last year. But that was not the case earlier. The foreign exchange reserves had fallen to only $1.2 billion. Only 1.2 billion. That was just enough for covering 2 weeks of imports. Just to put that into context, in 2025, India's foreign exchange reserve is close to 620, $630 billion. It keeps on changing. The RBI increases it, decreases it when they want to increase foreign exchange supply in the market or decrease that. But lump sum, 2025, it's about $630 billion, $640 billion. This is where we are. So imagine the kind of jump that we have seen from $1.2 billion to now be comfortable about $600 billion. We just did not have enough for importing. We barely had 2 weeks worth of foreign exchange to import. And after that, we would not even have had a situation where we could import crude oil. All of this meant that we were in a very, very, very bad time. So now please understand one more thing. I'll give you another example to show you how bad the situation was. Usually, when such a situation arises and a country does not have enough foreign exchange and they want to take a loan, there are a few options that you have. One option, you go to IMF, International Monetary Fund, which India also did. Apart from going to IMF, we can also go to foreign countries and their central banks and ask for loan from them. So let's say you go to the Switzerland Bank or Bank of Japan, Bank of England. These are central banks of their country, and you want to take a loan from them. And they do give loans. So usually, for example, let's say you go to Bank of Japan and ask them for some loan, they will ask for a guarantee in return. Since your country is not doing very well, so what guarantee can you give? The one guarantee that you can give against this loan is your gold reserves. So gold reserves act as a guarantee that you can give to the other countries from their central bank when you're taking money from them. You can basically put that as a guarantee. Now, usually what happens, let's say you tell Bank of England that we want money. So what they will do is, okay, they will have your gold as a guarantee, but they will not ask you to give them the gold. For example, India will tell them we have 100 tons of gold. They'll say, okay, keep it in India only. We will accept this as a guarantee. So we trust you that if the time comes, you will send us that gold, but you don't need to send it right now. We trust you this much. But in 1991, the situation was so bad in India that when we asked for a loan from Switzerland, Japan, UK, etc., they said, first send us your gold. That was unprecedented because usually you don't have to physically transfer your gold, but that was the lack of trust that they had in our ability back then, in our ability to pay the money back. They asked us to specifically transfer the gold physically, which we had to do. That was the extent of crisis that we had in 1991. There was also a problem of rising inflation. As I said earlier, we will be discussing inflation in detail later, but just to put that into context, inflation simply means increase in the price of general commodities. There was high inflation, people could not afford much stuff, there was high fiscal deficit. All of that led to the problem where even the essential commodities could not be bought by the common people. What inflation does is it erodes your purchasing power. Meaning, let's say you have 100 rupees with you right now and you can buy some stuff for 100 rupees. Let's say you can buy, let's assume basmati rice, 1 kg basmati rice for 100 rupees today. Okay. You keep that 100 rupee note with you in a box and you open that box after 10 years. After 10 years, if you take out that 100 rupee note, now you will not be able to buy 1 kg rice with it because the value of rice has increased now. But that 100 rupee note is still 100. So what has happened is that particular note, you have decreased its purchasing power. It is not able to purchase as much stuff now as it would have done earlier. So it has a negative impact on the poor. The low income individuals especially face a lot of hardship and they are not able to sustain for a long period of time because they just don't have enough money to sustain themselves. If you look at the external debt crisis, India's external debt, the money that we already owed to other countries was also increasing. So 1991 was not the first time that we had to take a loan. We had to take a loan earlier as well. So anyways, we had to pay money back. 1980s, we had excessive external borrowing because see, these kind of things, let's say 1991 crisis, they don't happen overnight. Like if you have a financial crisis, it's not that, oh, yesterday everything was fine, today I woke up into the financial crisis. No, it's a very gradual thing. So the problem started from 1980s itself, when we had started taking a lot of loan, when we borrowed a lot of money. 1991 it became so much that we just could not sustain it any further. But the problem of this external debt, the problem of us owing a lot of money to others, it had started way back in 1980s itself. It was not a problem that had suddenly emerged out of nowhere. And this is where the government also had to go to institutions such as the IMF and other countries. As I told you, there were multiple factors that were responsible for our foreign exchange crisis. The Gulf War impact. You anyways don't have enough money. On top of that, you have a situation where oil producing countries attack, oil supply in the global market reduces, and the oil prices go up. It was a shock not just for India but countries around the world when we had this oil crisis, when we had this oil shock. Balance of payment crisis, just not enough foreign exchange. we had been doing import financing and external debt was too high because you already owe a lot of money to other countries, you have to pay them back with interest. All of that led to this situation. By the way, I'll give you a very interesting anecdote here of the Gulf War. As I said, Gulf War was a war of Iraq versus Kuwait. Now, India has had a long standing policy that when there are conflicts in West Asia, or you call as the Middle East, same regions, America calls it Middle East, it's for us, it's West Africa, West Asia. So when there's a problem in West Asia or Middle East, India usually does not interfere. It's a long-standing foreign policy that when two or more countries of this region have a conflict with each other, we do not take sides. The reason is that we import oil and gas from most of them. Indians in large numbers work in a lot of these countries, so we don't want to take a side. But in this conflict, India was forced to take a side. The Gulf War was a situation where we had to take a side even if we did not want it. Why? Understand how politics works. This was a time that we had to go to the IMF to ask for a loan, the International Monetary Fund. The IMF even today works in such a manner that America has overwhelming powers in the IMF. America alone, if they vote yes, their vote is worth 16.8%. Imagine the kind of power that America has. They have so much power that if America says no, it would be almost impossible for any country to get a loan from the IMF. Now, in 1991, when India wanted a loan from the IMF, America said if you want us to say yes to this request, you have to accept a condition. What was the condition there? America planned to attack Iraq. America wanted to attack Saddam Hussein, to attack Iraq and defend Kuwait. America had its fighter planes in Philippines. From Philippines, they would fly all the way to Iraq. So the fighter planes of America had to stop in between somewhere for refueling purposes. So America demanded that India should allow fighter planes of America from Philippines to land in India, refuel, and then they would go off and attack Iraq. If India would say yes to this, only then America would say yes to Indian request at the IMF. It was not a straightforward decision. Because as I said, India historically has never taken sides in any conflict in West Asia, and we did not want to do that even then. But so was the necessity that we had at that time that we just could not say no. Because if we would have said no, America would have said no to the IMF, and India would not have gotten no. Because of our requirement at the IMF, we had to comply with what America is saying. We had to say yes, and thus India indirectly became a part of the Gulf War even without wanting to take part. That's the history of Gulf War, and that's the history of any war where the countries might not be directly fighting, but they still may be a part of the war, as India was, because India had to take a loan from the IMF. Now, what did we do? As I said, we went to other countries to take some loans, but mainly our efforts were towards going to the IMF, International Monetary Fund, to take loan from them. Now, when a country goes to the IMF, by the way, we will discuss later, but just for your knowledge here, there are two institutions that you will hear a lot about as we go: World Bank and IMF. These together are called the Bretton Woods twins. Bretton Woods is the name of a place where a conference was held after Second World War. As a part of this conference, these two institutions were set up. Now, they may sound similar, but they have very different jobs at hand. They do very different things. They give money for different stuff. For example, World Bank gives money for development purposes. So, for example, if I'm a country and I want to build a highway, airport, or I have a poverty alleviation program in my country to help the poor people, I will go to World Bank, ask them for a loan. IMF does not give loan for that purpose. IMF gives you loans specifically if you have a foreign exchange crisis or balance of payment crisis, as we had. Means when you do not have enough money for trading, when you do not have enough money to buy stuff from other countries, that is when you go to IMF, not World Bank. So these two have a very different job at their hand. They are not the same. IMF has a different job and World Bank has a different job. Now, in such a situation, we went to the IMF. One big problem with IMF is countries usually keep IMF as the last option. The reason is when you go and ask for a loan from the IMF, they will put something called conditionalities over you. They basically put conditionalities. Conditionalities means IMF will put certain conditions over you. Only when you comply with these conditions would the IMF eventually give you the loan. And these are often very tough conditions, not very easy to accept. That is why the countries usually avoid going to the IMF. For example, the conditions include structural reforms in the economy, open up the economy. Open up the economy would be what? Globalization. Reduction of government intervention. This would be privatization or rather liberalization. So this would be liberalization. Deregulating industries and financial market, that would be privatization. So essentially, what the IMF tells the countries to do is introduce LPG reforms. This is where a lot of people argue that the LPG reforms introduced by India were not by choice, rather they were forced upon India. India had no option to say no. India had to accept these things. Doesn't matter if it's a yes or a no. Government of India had to say yes. Only then would they get money from the IMF. That is why when people credit P.V. Narasimha Rao or Dr. Manmohan Singh with the LPG reforms, their critics say that while they should get some bit of credit, but actually it was not their idea. It was forced upon them by the IMF that they had to do it if they want to get money from the IMF anyways. It's a part of the debate. We won't go into who should get the credit for LPG reform, but this is what IMF does even today. When you go to IMF to ask for a loan, IMF will tell you to open up your market. It will tell you the government should decrease its expenditure. Government should not give freebies or subsidies. Government should allow the private investors to come in. Government should allow foreign investors to enter your market. All of that is a condition that IMF puts, which is a part of conditionalities of the IMF anyway. That happens even today. So this is not something that is out of the blue. And IMF has always had this condition. Now, 1991 was the watershed year when we had the new economic policy come up, which in other terms is called as the LPG reforms in that country. Let's see what was that policy all about. So the aim was simple, that in the long run, balance of payment crisis should not occur. Were we successful in that? If the goal was that such situation would not or should not occur again, yes, we were successful. I'll give you two interesting facts here. Number one, although the IMF offered us a loan of $7 billion in 1991 when we went and asked for a loan, we did not take the entire money. We took a part of it, we introduced the reforms, and the result was so quick that we did not need to take the entire part of the loan anyways. So number one, even at that time back when the IMF was offering $7 billion, we did not take the entire amount. One. Second, post that we have never gone to the IMF to ask for another loan. Both of these indicate towards the fact that our reforms at that time were successful. We were able to achieve what we had hoped for. In the long run, we were hoping for having a much more efficient government, a government that spends a lesser amount of money, a government that does not take so much debt. Now, we are on our way to do that. later on we will discuss something called FRBM Act that we have in India, Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act. This act puts a limit of how much debt should the government have. It puts a limit of fiscal deficit in the country and how much fiscal deficit we should have. The target of fiscal deficit earlier was 3%. Now the target is we should have fiscal deficit of 4.5% of GDP and not more than that. We'll discuss this later, but just telling you that in today's context, there is a limit as per the law how much loan or how much default or how much deficit can the government run, and the government should not go beyond that. The LPG reforms led to these things, that is, introduction of LPG reforms in India, led to privatization of most of the sectors, globalization, and money flowing into India. That also changed India's image in the world. Take a simple example here. Before 1991 reform, when India was a closed country, we did not have much investment coming in. So for most of the world, when they looked towards India before 1991, what they saw was a country with a huge population, but not a lot of market potential. But once the economy opened up, countries such as US, China, Russia, when they looked towards India now, they saw a market that they could explore, market where they could sell their products, market where they could engage. This is what made India even more attractive. By the time that we had a situation where market opened up, we had many more takers. China started taking renewed interest in India after 1991. So in terms of foreign relations, diplomatic relations also, 1991 was a watershed movement in India's history that changed how India was looked at from the other countries. Now we'll go into detail of LPNG one by one and understand what does it entail, the impact that it had, and where do we stand today. And we'll start with L for liberalization. Liberalization simply means letting go of or letting free. There's a phrase that is very famous called laissez-faire. Laissez-faire is a Latin phrase or French phrase rather. So it means let go of, be free. The government should not interfere. The government should allow the businesses to operate in a way that they want. Laissez-faire became a very famous philosophy in the Western world from the 19th century onwards, especially. After the Industrial Revolution, the governments wanted the private sector to have an open hand to run the business in whatever way that they want without the government's interference. Because the idea was that when private businesses operate on their own, without any restriction, with profit as a key motivator in their mind, they would always perform better than other government companies or public sector companies. That's where the liberalization reforms came into the picture. These are the few things that took place. First, abolition of licensing. For most of the sectors now, you would not require a license if you want to open up your sector. That was a big relief. As I told you earlier, there was a situation where for every single little thing you required a license no matter what. Now we have a situation where you do not need a license for most of these activities. Apart from that, there was encouragement given to private sector. Private sector was allowed to open up businesses much more freely. The government reduced taxation, the government tried to simplify it, the government tried to encourage them to open up their own businesses. There was end of license quota raj, as I told you earlier. The government had provided quota for almost every sector. The story of the government deciding that there would only be 20,000 cars in a year, these kind of quota systems were removed from the side of the government. The government took a step back and reduced the government control in the economy. Many new private entities were coming up. Government was happy for the private sector to come in, for the private sector to engage in the business rather than the government controlling every single thing. All of these are changes that were introduced under liberalization. And it did have a major impact. For example, RBI's role shifted from being a regulator to a facilitator. Means rather than stopping people or rather than stopping entities creating roadblocks, they became facilitators, helping entities, helping banks to expand their business, helping credit reach people very easily. A lot more private banks were allowed, many more private banks opened up. And we have reached a situation where today private banks are usually preferred over public banks by usual individuals across the country. For example, in the younger generation, if you ask them where would you want to or in which bank would you want to open up a bank account, in most of the cases, the answer would be the private banks. There's a stark difference between the services being offered, between the products being offered. There's a stark difference between how the customers are treated in these two entities. All that became possible after the liberalization reforms. FII's investment, foreign institutional investments in the market came up. Now, please understand this. It is not like before 1991, foreign investors were not allowed in India. That's not true. I'll give you a very interesting example. Look at Suzuki. Suzuki was one of the first big investors in India before 1991. How? Sanjay Gandhi started Maruti Udyog in India to make cars, but they did not have the technology to make cars in India. So what did they do? They contacted the Japanese company Suzuki. They asked them to come and collaborate, and Maruti Suzuki collaborated. And that led to Maruti Suzuki 800, the car that became very, very, very famous in India. So Suzuki came to India, invested in India much before 1991 reforms. We had companies such as Coca-Cola that had come to India, although they left India also, IBM. So there were examples of companies that had come to India before 1991 reforms. Don't think it was impossible. But it was so difficult that most companies either did not try to come to India, or if they did, they just could not survive in the long run. So it's not that before LPG reform, liberalization or globalization was not allowed. It was allowed. It was extremely difficult to do business in India because the government would create so many roadblocks. The government would think that you are taking away their profit. The government would think that you would do something against the country. So it was not that government was facilitating you. Rather, government was trying to stop you from achieving your potential. There was also bank flexibility that now allowed like the banks to operate much freely rather than the government telling them who to give loan to, how to expand, how not to expand. And eventually it led to a lot of reforms in terms of transparency, stability, etc. See, none of this happened overnight. It was all a very gradual change, but it was very visible on the ground. It was visible that many more people were now encouraged and they were pushed to open up new businesses without a lot of intervention from the government. It's a very continuous thing. It's an approach that doesn't have an end date. For example, it continues even today. Even today, you have state governments across the country that try to make sure that we are able to put more businesses on the ground. We are open to businesses running freely. Recently, Telangana announced, for example, that if you want to open up a startup in Telangana, you don't need any permission, any license to start the work. We will assume you have all the permissions. We will do that gradually later on, but you can start the businesses without even telling us. All this is a gradual process that continues even today. Then the government also simplified the tax structure. I told you earlier there was a time in India's history that income tax had reached 97% that had to be brought down, and not just brought down. See, there are two aspects of taxation system. One is the tax rate, how much tax are you taking? Second is the tax law simple or not? Is it simplified or is it complex? Now understand the difference here. when a company and an organization comes to invest in your country, yes, ideally they would want lower taxes, but more than that, what they want is simple taxes. It should not be complex. The taxation policy should not be random. So if the government today says I'll put 10% tax, fine. But keep it 10% for a long term. Don't change 20% next year, then 5%, then 2, then 12. That is not what businesses actually want. So they want simplification of tax structures. The government simplified the tax structures considerably after 1991 reforms. They also reduced the tax rates in most cases. Recently, we also have the GST being introduced. It was very recent in 2017. But as I said, these are very continuous, gradual processes that keep on happening. There's no end date to it. Like you can't say today we are liberalized. Today liberalization is complete. No, it's a very gradual process. It keeps on happening. You can always be more liberal than earlier. You can always be less liberal than earlier. It doesn't have to have an end date. One other thing that the government focused on and is focusing on till today is broadening of tax base. That is a huge problem that we have in India, and we have not been able to solve this problem even today. That is, we have a huge population, but from that population, very minute number of people actually pay direct taxes. See, there are two types of taxes, and we'll read about that later. There are direct taxes and there are indirect taxes. Indirect tax like the GST. For example, when you buy a packet of biscuit, chips, namkeen, whatever, the money that you are paying, it includes a component of tax that will be given to the government by the shopkeeper. That's an indirect tax because you are not paying directly to the government. Indirect tax is paid by everyone. Doesn't matter who you are because you may be the poorest person in the country, but even then if you buy a packet of chips or biscuit, you will have to pay that tax. It's a part of that MRP. So please don't make this mistake. Many students do this. Please don't make this mistake of saying most Indians don't pay tax. That is a wrong statement because every Indian pays indirect tax. You cannot avoid that. The correct statement would be most Indians don't pay direct taxes. This is where the problem is. And when it comes to direct taxes, this is what most Indians don't pay. And this is where the problem now starts. That there's a lot of tax avoidance. India has a very narrow tax base. India has been trying to improve that situation of broadening or expanding our tax base, but it is not that easy. It's not that easy because, see, everyone will try their best to avoid paying tax. It's human nature. The government does have many laws in place to stop tax evasion, but it's not that simple. India's foreign exchange also have improved because of a lot of changes that were introduced in 1991. For a long period of time, it was the Indian government that decided our exchange rate. Means $1 will be equal to how much rupees. The government decided that. You know that. That's never a good sign. No foreign investor would be comfortable with that because the government decides the rate of your currency. That is not advisable. This is when it was decided that the money will be devalued and we will determine our currency rate by market. This is what happens today. So today, $1 is equivalent to how much money, how many Indian rupees. The government doesn't decide. It's market linked now. It is a market that decides on the availability of foreign exchange, how much $1 will be equivalent to. That was a big step. The government had to step back. The government had to let it be determined by the market, but that is what has happened. It has led to much more market flexibility now. It has attracted more investment. It has attracted more exports as well. We see now a lot of FDI, foreign direct investment, coming into India in different sectors. We see a lot of foreign investment in our stock market as well, which we call as FPI, foreign portfolio investment. All that is possible or has been made possible because of these liberalization reforms that we have seen in India from time to time. Our trade policy also changed considerably. The tariff and quotas reduced. promoting free trade. Earlier, the government had put a lot of restrictions on how much you can sell, at what rate will you sell. All that was removed by the government gradually. There was also removal of quantitative restrictions. They said, how much can you produce? Because the government decided everything beforehand, that all has been let go of. And export have been now promoted. Earlier, there was a time when the government's focus was always on providing for what the Indian population wants. Produce, but only for what the Indian population requires. Don't make, manufacture, produce something from export point of view. That is what changed. Again, if you are not focusing on export, how will you ever earn foreign exchange? Foreign exchange, earning of currency that you can use for your trade can only be possible if you become an exporting country, as is the case of China, Vietnam, and these kind of countries. So our export promotion kicked in, where the government encouraged people to sell more stuff outside and to promote much more and to ensure that we have been producing products that are at par with the quality of outside countries. The government also reformed investment related policies. Foreign direct investment, as I told you, was encouraged. Government allowed foreign companies to come and take ownership of Indian companies in part. For example, now if you buy, let's say, an insurance policy of Tata AIG, Tata is an Indian company, AIG is not. Tata and AIG came together. Max, Bupa, Bajaj, Allianz, all of these are what examples of collaboration of Indian companies with foreign companies. Maruti Suzuki, the example that I gave you. Now they are not together. Hero Honda, remember? Honda is now gone. We only have Hero Motocorp, but all these are examples of government policies. The government also restricted or raised or removed restrictions on technology coming into India. One other very important example of what government did was focus on something called SEZ, Special Economic Zone. See, in order to attract investment into India, you have to offer something to the companies that is not offered by others. Why is it that Apple would set up their iPhone factory in India and not somewhere else? Why is it that Tesla should make cars in India and nowhere else? You have to give them certain incentive that if you come here, we'll give you this. If you come here, this is the advantage that you have. What advantage exactly are you offering them? This is where the government of India came up with SEZ. Many countries have it. The idea is, let's say the government of India will say that this one specific area, particular area in a city, will be called as SEZ. So let's say this area is SEZ. If you open up your factory here or office here, your tax rates will be different than others. The policies that will be applicable on you will not be the same as others. For all tax related purposes, you will not be treated as a part of the country. Lower taxes for you, easier permissions for you, single window clearance for you, much better infrastructure for you as compared to other parts. The government will provide you enough skilled people to have better job opportunities. Government will give you the best infrastructure to boost exports. So this place will be near to a port, near to railways, near to airports, whatever infrastructure you need, the government will provide. The government might also offer you land at a lower cost. The government might also offer you what is called as tax break. Tax breaks, as in government will say, we have a corporate tax of 22%, but let's say for the first 5 years, I will not take any tax from you. My tax will only start from 6th year. These are some of the things that the government offers to companies who want to come in and set up their entire infrastructure in special economic zones or SEZ. Because the government knows that once these companies come in, they don't come in for short-term investment. When a company is coming in to set up infrastructure, let's say if Tesla comes in to set up a factory, it is not that after a few months they'll say, okay, Tata, bye. Since they're investing such a huge amount of money, they come in for a long term. So eventually, government will make profit out of it. Eventually, they would give us jobs. Eventually, they would result in better infrastructure. Eventually, all of this would improve. So, in the long term, it is a profitable decision. It is a good decision for the government, and that is why we opt for these kind of things. As I said, the government promises single window clearance. Single window clearance is simple. That in usual cases, let's say if I have to set up a factory, I have to take permission from multiple ministries, departments, environmental ministry, labor ministry, so on and so forth, to make sure everyone is fine with it. But single window clearance means that I have just allowed, or you can just ask for permission at one single place, and every ministry will give you permission there itself. You don't have to take your file from one ministry to the other. You apply at one single platform, one single portal, and all the concerned ministries or departments will give you the permission there itself. SEZs are also offered tax incentive, as I told you, exemption from, let's say, custom duty, central excise duty. It depends on case to case basis. The government, for example, has been offering many tax benefits to invite, and they have been successful. Apple now manufactures a large number of iPhones in the country. We are in talks with Tesla also to come and bring their production to India. All these are initiatives under SEZ. Then flexible labor laws also. One of the reasons why corporates or big factories don't get set up in India is because of labor laws. Very simple. Take a very simple example. Let's say you run a garment factory and you got a huge order. Let's say Zudio. You all know Zudio? Let's say Zudio gave you an order that make 1 lakh shirts for me. Okay. Now, when you are given an order of, let's say, giving 1 lakh shirts to them within 2 months, so you need many people to work for you. So you will hire a lot of laborers. They will work for you 2 months, day and night. You pay them money. You deliver the order. Now, once you deliver the order, now you don't need all these thousands of people on your payroll. They have worked for you. Now their job is done. So you want to leave them or remove them from the job. But our labor laws would not allow that. They would not allow you to randomly fire people. You have to give them a notice period. You have to give them many other facilities. So what these contractors do is, other than getting into all these laws and problems, they might as well not take the project. This is where labor laws have to be flexible. Yes, you cannot have zero labor laws. You have to protect labor also from exploitation. But you have to find a balance between the two. Having labor laws so that we provide enough protection to laborers, but don't have them hard enough or harsh enough that companies themselves say that, oh, it's better not to do any business in India rather than following these labor laws. This is where the government is trying to find a balance, and they try to do that specifically with the companies in SEZ. Having said that, not everything is hunky dory in SEZ or special economic zones. The single biggest problem that we have in India in big infrastructure projects, and we have always had this problem, is a land acquisition issue. There are so many examples in the country where you will see big companies ready to invest huge amount of money, build infrastructure, give jobs, but none of them translates into reality just because of so many protests against the project that they are just not able to do that. There is a very famous example of Tata Nano. Tata decided Tata Nano factory would be in West Bengal. Everything was decided. It was a communist government at that point of time. Mamata Banerjee was the leader of the opposition, and she organized this protest with the farmers and told the farmers not to give away the land. It became such a violent protest. People died, and Tatas were so fed up that they announced, okay, we will not have our factory in West Bengal. They shifted their factory in Gujarat. So the same jobs that could have been given to, let's say, West Bengal went to Gujarat. Because land acquisition is such a touchy issue in India. You read reports about China was able to build a bridge in 2 weeks, and then you see India, the same bridge takes 2 years. Why? One big problem is because land acquisition is such a big problem in India. When you have so many people owning small amounts of land, so many farmers, even if one or two of them say no, you can't force them. That becomes a problem. So making SEZs or bringing companies to SEZ on paper seems like an easy thing to do. But in reality, to convince people to give away their land, acquire that land is extremely, extremely difficult. There are regulatory hurdles in place. There are still bureaucrats that would not go against the rules and they would still follow on as many rules as possible. And the regulations are still not that easy. See, it's very interesting and intriguing to understand. Just because the government at the top level has made a policy and the government says, oh, we will have XYZ now, everything will be perfect, sweetly clean, you can come to India, do your business. That doesn't mean that this is how situation will be on ground. On the ground, a lot is decided by the bureaucrats and the attitude that the bureaucrats would have towards implementing such policies. If the bureaucrats do not want to implement these policies, it will be very, very, very hard for the government to do that. And if you are asking why is it the bureaucrats will delay, think of it from the bureaucrats' point of view. Complexity or complex laws are the best friend for any bureaucrat. Please understand this. A bureaucrat is very powerful in India or in any country where the laws or policies are complex. The moment you simplify the laws, the moment you simplify the policy, you don't really need a bureaucrat. So the power of the bureaucrat lies in keeping the process complex. And this is where the problem starts. That despite the government's efforts, regulatory hurdles are not that easy to navigate through. There are also infrastructure gaps. Even when you do acquire land, it's not that easy to build. There are infrastructure quality issues. There is a lot of investment that is required in such projects. So just thinking or assuming that when the government wants, they would be able to make a change, that is not how it works. You will see politicians while fighting elections making a lot of promises. When I come to power, I do this, I do that. But that is not how things work. It's a slow, gradual process, a slow, gradual grind, and this is where the challenges are real when it comes to even the SEC. Having said that, it's not that everything is bad. There have been many impacts of liberalization on the positive front as well. For example, it is without any doubt that it has increased our industrial growth rate, it has expanded our private sector participation considerably. We have so many new sectors that have come up, which did not exist earlier. You know, these BPO jobs or KPO jobs or consulting jobs that we have now, none of these existed pre 1991 reforms. There has been a healthy growth in foreign exchange reserves as well. The numbers that I just gave you, 2025, the economic survey that came up, it said that in December 2024, our foreign exchange reserve was $640 billion. After that, RBI sold 10-15 billion. So even now, it is not below $620-630 billion foreign exchange reserve. So it's a very healthy jump that we have made. Especially certain sectors have been able to be world leaders from India. IT sector especially has become the crowning glory of India's growth. We have a lot more FDI coming into India. Around $60-70 billion of FDI comes in on average every year from countries such as Singapore, US, etc. So there have been positive impacts of all these policies that we have seen from the side of the government. The next component of the LPG reforms is P, that means privatization. While the liberalization reforms were meant to liberate the industry, were meant to tell the industry that the government will not interfere in your working and you're free to do whatever you want. Privatization, on the other hand, was about giving a push to the private sector. It was about telling the private sector that you can come in and you can also be a part of multiple sectors where earlier there was only government's monopoly. This is where privatization played a key role. The private sector was told that your money, your investment will be safe. You can also take a part in the growth story of the country. Earlier, It was only the government sector enterprises that were given the prime responsibility of taking the country forward, of running the country's developmental chart. Now, it happened in a couple of ways. Number one, the existing resources that the government had, the government companies owned by the government, some of them were either sold to the private sector or a part of it was sold to the private sector. So the government made certain sales, some partial sales. It was called as disinvestment. Apart from that, the government also allowed the private sector to enter certain sectors which were earlier only reserved for the government. For example, if you just go back a few years, private sector was not allowed in the defense sector. Now the government does allow and wants more and more private sector to come in and take part in the defense sector. If you look at countries such as France, such as US, most of the high technology products that are being built are actually by private companies. The famous Rafale fighter jet that we have bought from France, it is made by a private company, Dassault. The famous planes that you fighter jets that you talk about acquiring from the US, those are all made by private companies in the US. So around the world, there are innumerable examples of private sector spending a lot of money in research and development and coming up with these kind of state of the art technology, state of the art development. This is something that the government of India is also trying to do, trying to push through its privatization model. Now, let's see what are the different methods of privatization that the government of India adopted after the 1991 reforms were introduced. First, as I said, disinvestment. Disinvestment would be when the government sells a part of its company to the private sector. In return, they get money from the private sector. They also get participation of the private sector. They get their expertise. They get their own people, the talented bunch of people who will try and run the company forward. This happens by number one, selling of shares to the investors, selling of the entire stake, or it also reduces fiscal deficit because it allows the government to earn money. Now, this is a slightly more tricky than you can imagine. Usually, when the government sells a government company, the objective of the government is, in most cases, not to sell the entire company. What the government wants to do is sell a part of it so that they can retain some part, and then when the company becomes bigger, when they make more profit, they would be able to get rich dividends out of it. However, the private sector, on the other hand, in most cases wants that if the government is selling a company, they should sell 100% stake. Take the example of Air India. When the government wanted to sell Air India to the private sector, they first offered someone to buy 26%. No one came. Then they offered companies to buy 49% of it. No one came. Then they offered 76% of the company, trying to retain 24%. Again, no private sector company showed any interest. It was only when the government was ready to offer 100% stake and the entire company was being sold, it was only then that we had the Tatas making a bid for it and taking up this entire company. This investment thus allows the government not just to earn money, but also give away the company in the hands of those who are experts in running that and who are expected to make it much more profitable. Now, one other problem that occurs in such cases is governments usually want to sell off companies that are loss making and that are not really making a lot of profit. One misconception that many people have in their mind is they assume that all the government companies are loss making, which is not true. There are some government companies that are humongous profit making companies like ONGC, for example. Thousands and crores of profit every single month. ONGC is like a cash cow for the government. So the government would never want to sell any part of ONGC. They would want to sell parts of those organizations that are not making a profit for the government. And this is where the private sector does not like this approach from the side of the government. The government also might look into the option of strategic sale, where the government transfers its shares to the private company and the private company also gets management rights of the company. This is extremely important. When the private sector buys a certain company or buys a certain stake in the company, it's not just about buying stake. They also want to run the company in the manner that they see fit. Because according to them, in the first place, the reason why the companies went into loss was that the government was running it inefficiently. The government was not running it in the best possible manner. Strategic sale would involve the private sector taking over the managerial responsibilities of this organization as well. This is an option that the governments don't really like because, irrespective of whichever party is in power, most governments would want to control as much as they can, would want to control these industries, would want to control these companies. But when there's no option left and the private sector is not ready to give any money unless they are getting the chance to manage it, the government has to bow down to their wishes. This is where we have the PPP model, public private partnership. Something that you would have read about a lot in the news, the PPP model, where the government and the private companies work hand in hand on certain projects. There are certain pros, that is advantages, and there are certain cons of such an arrangement. The important pros where it actually sits well for the government include risk sharing, because the capital then is involved of not just the government but government and the private companies. For example, heavy infrastructure projects, big expressways, highways that are built these years, all these are actually built with the government and a private sector company collaborating and then making sure that their investment is pooled in. So there is sharing of risk in such a manner that the government alone doesn't have to put in the entire sum. It also brings in cost efficiency, because while the government might not mind the cost ballooning, the private sector is so cost conscious, the private sector is so conscious of the profit that they are supposed to be much more efficient in how the resources are being used. There is little doubt over the fact that the private sector and the way in which they work, it is much more cost efficient as compared to the government. It also brings a situation of benefit sharing, where the government is open to sharing benefit and the private sector does invest a lot of their money, because when both of these companies or both of these entities are bringing their money together, both of them will always take a share in benefits as well. There's also infrastructure development, as I told you, multiple big projects. Take an example of the parliament building itself. The new parliament building is built by the government of India and Tata Capitals, the Tata projects. So there is leads to a lot of infrastructure development which would have been a much slower process. It also leads to service delivery improvement, because as I said, private sector is expected to adhere to timelines in a much better manner. Because it all comes down to the fact that the private sector is essentially working for improving their profit, making sure that the deliverables are done within the given timeline. It means that the service delivery is improved many folds as compared to a situation where the government alone would have been doing this work. On the other hand, it has certain other loopholes, certain other shortcomings. This entire arrangement, there is a potential for conflict. When the two parties are involved, both of them would want the best for themselves. It might lead to certain conflicts. The two might not see eye to eye with each other. Certain parts of the project might not seem to have both the parties agreeing to each other. There might not be consensus. It might lead to certain issues. It will also lead to complex contracts. Again, the private sector would want to get their money back with significant amount of profit. It leads to certain contracts being signed with the government of India, and this leads to certain complex situations of how the contracts have to be signed. Accountability issues: if something goes wrong in such a project, who will be held responsible? When you have a project where multiple parties are involved, there's always a tendency to shift the blame if something wrong happens. And the same can be the scenario in public-private partnerships. There's also a case of public interest being compromised, because the government at the end of the day is answerable to the public. The government will do what is best for the public. But does the private sector also do the same? Not always. While the private sector works specifically to maximize their profit, that might not coincide always with the interests of the public. While the government keeps the interest of the public in mind, the private sector might not be expected to do the same every single time. There's also a problem of long-term commitment because infrastructure projects, highways, etc., they are built over multiple years. So you have to work together for multiple years. And this is where there can be some issues between two parties. Simply when, for example, let's say the government, especially when they change, when a new party comes to power, they might not like the way that the private sector is working, that company is working in that contract. So change in the government, change in the ministries, all of that might lead to some complex issues in these contracts. And this is where the public-private partnership is good in certain sense, but it's not always the best way forward. One more thing that we have seen the government doing is something called corporatization, means bringing the corporates into running of the government. We had discussed earlier, one of the big problems, the key issues with the running of many public sector enterprises is that the people who are given the responsibility to run these enterprises are not trained professionals in running the business. Most of them are bureaucrats. Most of them do not have a degree in running of the businesses. So for these kind of organizations to be run by people who are not, or whose first responsibility is not running of these business, this may not be the best way forward. This is where the government tries to do this, where some of the important companies of the government are run by experts of that field. For example, look at Air India itself. When Air India was a government entity, for a long time the government had actually invited professionals from the field of civil aviation to be the head of Air India. They were not bureaucrats. This does happen where the government gives autonomy to these people to take decisions for the companies, whatever they think is the best. The government gives them a free hand. The government also ensures their responsibility, accountability. The government makes sure that the decision taken is transparent, and the government makes sure that there are professionals who are in charge of running these organizations. So getting the corporate culture into running of these companies is also something that the government has been doing in certain cases. These are just examples and ways in which the government has been bringing in private sector in running of the government companies and government entities over the years. One other very interesting thing that has happened is the private sector companies always demand that public sector companies rather, demand that they want autonomy to take their own decisions. Take the example of, let's say, ONGC. The ONGC is such a huge company, makes such huge profits. They have to sign many agreements, they have to sign many deals, sometimes deals outside the country as well. They want that they should be given the freedom to take these decisions, and they should not have to go back to the government every single time to take a certain decision. Usually, the governments don't want to give a lot of autonomy to these companies because the strength of the government comes from controlling these organizations, these cash cows. And the government feels that if we let them go, we would not have enough controlling power. But interestingly, the governments have given certain autonomy to these companies. Now, how does that work? Let's try and understand. As of today, government companies are given certain status depending upon how big or how small they are. There are three certain status: Maharatna, big government companies; Navratna, the medium ones; and then Mini Ratnas. So these are the three types of company. Now, there are some government companies that are not in any of the three categories, but depending on their operations, how much profit are they making, how old they are, their presence, etc. Depending upon all of that, some companies are given the status of Maharatna, some Navratna, and some Mini Ratna. Maharatnas are the ones that are the best performing of all, because of which they are given a lot of freedom from the side of the government to take their decisions. I'll give you the exact number. This is important for the examination. Let's see how do these companies qualify. Let's start with the Maharatna. How does a company become a Maharatna? This is the eligibility criteria. First, the company should already be a Navratna. Second, the company's annual turnover should be more than 25,000 crore for the last 3 years. Not just for 1 year, For the last 3 years, the company's overall turnover should be over 25,000 crore. Means the amount of business it does, not the profit, that's the business it does, the transactions. Net profit should be more than 5,000 crore for the past 3 years. So profitable, highly profitable, profit in excess of 5,000 crore in the last 3 years. Fourth, they should be listed on the Indian Stock Exchange. So people should be able to buy their stakes, buy their stocks, etc. Net worth should be over 15,000 crore for the last 3 years. Net worth, the value of the company, should be in excess of 15,000 crore for the last 3 years, and they should have a significant global presence, not just an India-based company. They should have presence in other countries as well. For example, again, I'll take the example of ONGC. ONGC has an arm called ONGC Videsh. They take up contract in many other parts of the world to explore oil and gas. For example, they have oil fields in Russia. They have oil fields in Iran, for example. So let's say Iran tomorrow discovers gas or oil in some new part. They don't want to spend money extracting that or taking that out. They will give a contract. They will ask companies around the world which company wants to come to Iran, spend money to extract the gas. Whoever extracts it, they will share half and half between Iran and themselves. That's how these contracts are signed. So ONGC Videsh does a lot of these contracts. If a company qualifies this, it becomes a Maharatna. And what do they get? What are the advantages? These are the privileges that they get. First big privilege, they can invest up to 5,000 crore rupees without the government's prior approval. Because see, what happens is, at the Iran example I gave you, Iran discovered a new oil field, they are given a contract, and they're asking companies around the world, whoever wants to come and bid for that. These are all time sensitive matters. If ONGC does not bid within a few days, the contract will be gone and given to someone else. So if ONGC now starts taking permission from the government and the government bureaucratic process is always delayed, they will lose out on the project. So the government has given them autonomy that, okay, up to 5,000 crore rupees of investment, don't ask us. You can do it on your own. We trust you. Similarly, joint ventures, if they want, they can have global joint ventures, and they can also have mergers and acquisitions up to 5,000 crore. The government will not interfere. These are the advantages that a Maharatna company gets. Now, which are these companies? The ONGC am I talking about? I'll just give you a few examples. These are not the all of them. These are just a few examples. Look at them. BHEL, Bharat Heavy Electrical Limited. Then we have BPCL, Bharat Petroleum, Coal India, GAIL, NTPC, IOCL, HPCL, ONGC. All of these are Maharatna. So these are huge cash cows for the government, earning humongous amount of profit year after year after year. Similarly, we have companies in the second category called Navratna. This is the second category. How does a company become a Navratna? First, it has to be a Mini Ratna category 1. Now, as we discuss later on, you will see next up, Mini Ratna is of two types, category 1 and category 2. So amongst Mini Ratna, first category Mini Ratna, that's just the first criteria. Second, you should have at least 4 independent directors on the board. Now, this is interesting. Big companies often have something called independent directors. Now, when a company becomes big, the decisions of the company are not taken by an individual. There is a board formed of the company. So there would be 7, 8, 9, whatever members in the board, and they will together take the decision. Big companies have independent directors. Independent directors means those who are not associated with the company. Those are there in the board so that the decisions are taken in the interest of the larger public. These independent directors will have to make sure that the decision of the company is in the interest of the larger shareholders. For example, if I own certain shares of Zomato, I am a part owner of Zomato, I own some shares, but I'm not a part of the board meeting. So who will make sure in the board that the decisions are not taken against my interest? These are independent directors. For example, Narayan Murthy, he's from Infosys, but he may be an independent director in many of the other companies which may have invited him that please come and be an independent director. You are well known. People trust your integrity. People think that whatever decision you will take will be the correct, honest decision. So you can come and be an independent board member. Ratan Tata, when he was alive, he used to be an independent board member in many of these organizations. So these companies should have at least 4 independent directors on the board. Then they should have a score of 60 from 100 from 6 financial parameters. So there are certain financial parameters on the basis of which they are marked: turnover, profit, etc. It's slightly complicated, don't go into that. Just that their composite score in that should be at least 60 out of 100. And fourth, it should be a top tier central public sector enterprise. So the government lists its companies into different categories. One of them is called Schedule A. Big companies are Schedule A. You don't have to remember the entire list. Schedule A should be the status of this enterprise. When all these are met, then the company can be called as a Navratna. And what do you get when you become a Navratna? These are the privileges. You get investment freedom and ability to invest up to 1000 crores independently without the government having any interference in you. So you take the decisions. If you have to invest up to 1000 crore, your board can take the decision, government will not interfere. And you can have autonomy in joint ventures as well. Up to this amount, the government will not interfere. So again, depending upon your level of operation, depending on how profitable, how big you already are, the government will give you certain autonomy. Third category comes as, or rather before that, just examples of Navratnas: Bharat Electronics Limited, Container Corporation, Engineers India, HCL. All these are Navratnas. Third category is what we call as Mini Ratnas. Mini Ratnas are of two categories: Category 1, Category 2. Category 1 is higher, then comes Category 2. So Category 1 is the first category, that is slightly higher. Category 1 is those who are profitable continuously for the past 3 years and their pre-tax profit. So from the profit you pay tax also. Before you pay tax, the pre-tax profit that you have earned should be over 30 crores in at least one of the last 3 years. And you should have a positive net worth. In case of Maharatna, Navratna, the eligibility criteria was for 3 years continuously. This is for at least one of the last 3 years. You should have had a profit before tax of 30 crores at least. That's when you become a Category 1 Mini Ratna. Category 2 Mini Ratna is easier. It just requires you to be profitable and positive net worth in the last 3 years. How much profit? They don't mention this. So as long as you are not loss making, as long as you are profit making in the last 3 years, you will be called a Mini Ratna Category 2. This is how the government has been able to have different categories of companies in the country. These are certain privileges that they get. Category 1, that is a bigger one. They are allowed investment of up to 500 crore or equal to their net worth. So again, Maharatna, investment worth 5,000 crore they can do. Navratna, investment to 1,000 crore they can do. They can do higher than that also, but that will be with government's permission. We are talking about without government's permission required. For category 2, they can invest up to 300 crore rupees or 50% of their net worth. Whatever their net worth is, half of that or 300 crore, whichever is higher, they can go and invest that. But the autonomy that they get is lower than other categories. So they can't enter into joint ventures, etc. They can't enter into new initiatives without the government's permission. These categories and the eligibility criteria, etc., can be asked in the prelims examination. So I would advise you to try and remember these. These are some examples of Mini Ratna, Category 1, Category 2. Exact number keeps fluctuating because, as I said, some of them might not fulfill the eligibility criteria this year, so they might come out of the list. Some other might fulfill the eligibility criteria, they might enter the list. So it's slightly variable. Lump sum, Category 1 is much more, about 61 companies in Category 1, 13 in Category 2. That is how Mini Ratnas stack up as of now. Now, why is it that you would need to privatize? What exactly is the reason why you would need to privatize your companies or privatize the sector? Why is it not that the government can alone do whatever businesses that they want? See, the idea is very simple to understand. If you have an economy where government alone handles every single thing, yes, it gives control to the government, but it also adds a lot of pressure on the working of the government. The government then has to be responsible for giving jobs. You would have seen this. It doesn't happen in many other countries. In India, when you have elections, there is a demand that we want jobs and more jobs to be given. See, the reality is, it is not the government's responsibility to give jobs to the people. It might be harsh to listen to it, but the reality is, it is not the government's job to give job to the people. It is the government's responsibility to create circumstances in which jobs are created in the private sector. But when the government can't create those circumstances, they eventually have to end up giving jobs themselves so that the people can still vote for them. But it is not the government's job to search and to give out employment to the people. But in a government or in a country where government controls everything, the responsibility of giving jobs comes on the government itself. So privatization is also about the government giving away some of its responsibility, letting the private sector come up and then take the responsibility of taking the country forward. This is also where privatization is important. It has been proven beyond doubt that the private sector and its operations have been much, much more efficient as compared to the public sector. It reduces the financial burden on the government because, again, this notion that the government cannot or will not throw people out of the job, government will never cut jobs, that is slightly tricky. I'll give you a simple example. Look at the airline business around the world. One way to measure how efficient the airlines are, one parameter to do that, is when you measure their staff per aircraft. How many staff does an airline have per aircraft that they own? Lesser this number, the more profitable you would be. So companies such as Indigo, Singapore Airlines, etc., they usually have lump sum 160 people or 160 employees per aircraft. Air India, when it was a government company, for them this number was above 300. Imagine this. For the same number of aircraft, they had twice the number of people who would work for Indigo or Singapore Airlines. That obviously means they would have to pay much more salary, they have to pay much more expenses, and because it was a government entity, you cannot let the people go. This is where the private sector plays an important role, where they take up the burden of the government and they take up the responsibility of running this business in a profitable manner. And when the business is run profitably, it also attracts more private investment, and the resources of the government that are then left free, they can be and should be used in manner that is better suited for them. When the government doesn't have any money left from running of these companies, they obviously can't invest much in infrastructure, education, healthcare, because they don't have any money left. When the private sector comes in, it gives the government bandwidth, it gives the government more money in their hand that can be spent in other ways, which is much more beneficial for the entire country. This is where privatization plays an important role and thus is encouraged. Now, having said that, it's not that easy. Whenever the government takes such a decision, whenever any government says, even the current government, whenever they announce that we want to privatize something, there is a large scale criticism that they have to face. Operation members say, oh, you are selling our asset, private sector will own the entire country. So it has never been such an easy way for any government, irrespective of whichever party they belong to. There are many challenges in privatization as well. For example, undervaluation of public asset. At what price, at what rate are you ready or willing to sell these? Government would want to get the best price, but the private sector knows that the government is under pressure right now. And thus, they kind of bully the government into selling their resource at a lower price. So there is a lot of situation or a lot of circumstances where the government assets are sold at a lesser value than what they should be worth. It has an obvious impact on employment. Again, There are two ways to look at it. Private sector cutting jobs would bring efficiency to that organization. Fine. It would make that organization profitable. It would improve the efficiency and the working method of that organization. But on the other hand, downsizing means unemployment. Downsizing means letting go of jobs. And this is where an economy like India cannot afford such a situation. And that's why the governments usually shy away from the idea of privatization on a large scale. There's also political resistance. As I said, any government, whenever they try to privatize any entity, there will always be opposition from the other political parties. Doesn't matter if the other political parties, when they were in power, they were doing the same thing. But even then, that's how politics works. Whatever decision you take, the opposition will try and take advantage of that, it will try and criticize you for that. And if you don't have the political capital, if you don't have so much support, you might worry and you might not take that decision. There have been so many times that the governments have stepped back from their decision to privatize some entities. There's also a problem of monopoly. When the government is operational in a sector, since their idea is not to make profit, their idea is to serve the public, they would not increase the prices of commodities if they think that people would not be able to afford it. But you can't expect the same of the private sector. For the private sector, on the other hand, since their entire motive is profit making, they would love the chance to be a monopoly and thus increase the prices of the commodities. This increase in price can have a devastating effect on a lot of population in the entire country. This is where it becomes problematic. There are also social welfare issues because not all the businesses are being run to make profit. I'll give you an example. Take the example of railways right now. When you go to book your ticket on IRCTC website has a message running on the screen which says that the government is only charging you 57% of your ticket costs, meaning that if the railway spends 100 rupees to transport you from point A to point B, the government only takes 57 rupees from you, 43 they give from their own pocket. Because the government knows that railways is the lifeline of the country. And if they increase the prices substantially, a lot of people will not be able to afford it. For the private sector, that would not make sense. If a private company, if a private entity is running the railways, for them, it would not make any sense. They would increase the price, doesn't matter if the people can't afford it. This is where certain decisions of the government, certain decisions in the businesses can't be taken from the point of view of profit alone, and they have to be seen in larger context of things, which might not be the case if everything is privatized. What does privatization lead to? What are the outcomes that we have? In most cases, the fears of monopoly, etc., have not been found to be true. In most historical cases of privatization, we have seen performance being improved in most public sector companies. We have seen most of these companies generate much more revenue as compared to what it used to be. And it has led to improved competition in the overall market as well. Look at telecommunication. Earlier, we used to have BSNL and MTNL. Now, since we have Jio, we have Vodafone Idea, we have Airtel, there is competition. People know that they can shift from one operator to the other. We know a situation where now BSNL, MTNL would have to compete with them. Earlier, when there were no private courier operators, etc., and post office was a monopoly, they had no incentive to improve their working. They had no incentive to be more efficient because people had no other option. Now, because of the private sector coming in, because people have more options to opt for, the post office, if they want to get people on their side, if they want to get people become their customers, they have to improve their services. So there is no doubt about the fact that privatization has led to improved competition and in turn much improved efficiency of different sectors. The third part of LPG reforms is G for globalization. In simple terms, globalization means opening up your nation's market to be accessed by other countries and their companies. Also, opening up the borders for your products to be sold outside and their products to come to India and their investment, their money, their expertise come to India. This is one of those things that you see all around you. You go out in the market, you see brands such as McDonald's, you see Zara when you want to buy some clothes, you see products of Apple, Samsung, all available around you. We are living in a world right now where a person sitting in America or Europe or Australia would be buying the same products as you are buying sitting in India. That is possible because of globalization, because of free flow of products from one place to the other, because how the barriers have come down and the companies, governments rather, have realized the importance of bridging these gaps between these nations. Let's understand how it acted as a key reform. I said earlier also when we were discussing the last chapter, India, by the time 1991 came around, was desperate for foreign exchange. We were desperate to have more dollars, pounds, euros with us. There are few ways in which you can earn that, and one of the ways is if a foreign investor, if an American investor, for example, would invest his or her dollars into India, or a European investor would want to invest their euros into India. For that, we have to make situations that are suitable for them for their investment. This is where globalization comes in. Now, how does globalization look like? First, reduction in trade barriers. Not long before 1991, the government of India had quotas for import of everything. The companies were told this is the amount of products you can import, no more than that. For each and every import, you had to take a specific license. There was a complex process involved. You had to prove why you need a certain commodity, why you need it in certain quantity. And then some bureaucrat in his own room will decide, oh, whether I should allow this to you or not. Even if the bureaucrat had little knowledge of how your business works, bureaucrat had little knowledge about why is it important or not important for you, they would decide on your behalf. That was removed. Import became much easier, much simpler. You could import stuff from other parts of the world now. I'll give you a simple example. You know the dry cleans that you give, the dry cleaning clothes that we have? Before 1991, in India, most of the shops where you would, if you would go, if you basically give your cloth for dry cleaning, it would come back with a very particular smell of kerosene. Because almost all the dry cleaning companies in India were actually using kerosene to clean your cloth. Why? Because the dry cleaning machines were made in Germany and their import was not allowed. Just imagine this. So our people would have to dry clean the clothes using kerosene. This is just one example of how the governments decided randomly what would be allowed to be imported, what would not be allowed. The government also focused on improving foreign direct investment, means investment into our companies, our businesses. When India opened up its market in 1991, many investors realized that India can have a great potential. We were a company where we had a large population whose purchasing power was improving significantly, and all the companies want to take advantage of that. So there was much more investment in the key sectors, FDI policies were liberalized, and it's again an ongoing, continuous process. Every single year, you see the government making announcements, even today, about FDI. For example, this year the government announced that in the insurance sector, government will allow 100% FDI now with certain conditions. Means a foreign company can come and run an insurance company in India now without having to collaborate with an Indian company. 100% FDI will be allowed. These were not possible before the 1991 reforms were introduced. This also started a new phenomena in India, a new industry in India called the outsourcing industry. India has become the back office of the world because of the IT services, the BPO services that we offer to the world now. There are companies in US, let's say AT&T. There's a company in US, like we have Geo in India. There's AT&T in US. They sell internet connections. If a customer of AT&T doesn't have good internet, they will call to the call center, and that call will come to someone sitting in India. They will try and resolve that problem for them, and AT&T will pay that guy who's sitting in India. That is how the outsourcing industry works for IT, for BPO. This is possible now because of globalization, which was not the case earlier. It is possible now because the companies are allowed to set up such a structure in India, employ Indians who would work for the American companies. Work such as accounting, legal services, all of that now can be given without you having to sit there. You can work in an American company without ever having to go to America. There is a new trend of work from home jobs where you would not need to go to the company's office, where you would not need to go anywhere in the world. You would be paid, you will be doing everything sitting where you are. All that is possible because of globalization. The world has become one single place. You're wearing the same brand of clothes, you're using the same products, you're watching the same web series and movies as someone of your age sitting in Europe or Australia or US or Africa is doing right now. It is because all these barriers, the physical barriers, have been taken away with the advent of globalization. Over here, an extremely vital role has been played by WTO, the World Trade Organization, that came up in 1994. The WTO is in itself is a very unique organization. WTO and its issues with India, we'll discuss that in the future. But WTO is an organization whose purpose is to improve world trade, whose purpose is to make sure that if two countries have trade agreements, they are upheld with each other. If India and America, for example, have a trade agreement and there is some dispute in that, we can go to WTO. They help us in resolving dispute, they monitor the policy, and they try and promote free trade. Whatever they say is not binding on the nation, but they actually act as a platform, as an organization that promotes free trade by encouraging the countries to give national treatment to other nations' products as well. So, for example, if in India an American product enters, an American company sells their products into India, the Indian government should treat it the same way as they would treat an Indian product, which is called national treatment. All this is mandated by the WTO. WTO has been extremely crucial, extremely critical in ensuring the success of free trade around the entire world. Now, please understand, when we say free trade, that does not mean trade without any taxes. Please don't confuse yourself. Free trade doesn't mean zero taxes. It doesn't mean that the nations don't put taxes on each other. Now, they still import taxes, custom duty, all of that is still done. Free trade means that illogical barriers will not be imposed. There will not be random restrictions on the products of your company, on the products of your nation when it goes to some other nation. This is where the WTO comes in, and with its dispute resolution mechanism, it has been able to make a significant difference. There are some challenges that India faces, specifically at WTO. We'll discuss some of them later on in detail. For example, one big challenge with WTO that India has is agriculture subsidy. In principle, WTO does not like subsidies. In principle, they advise all the nations to reduce, cut down, and phase out their subsidies as much as possible. The idea is subsidies artificially reduce the prices of commodities, which is true. India, for example, has a national food security program under which the government sells rice at 3 rupees per kg. Government sells wheat at 2 rupees per kg. Farmer is not selling at 3 rupees kg. Farmer may be selling at 40 rupees per kg. The government then comes in between and tells the farmer, we will give you the price difference, but we will sell it at 3 rupees per kg. So when you artificially reduce the price, when you artificially suppress the price, that is not good for international trade, because the same product might go to some other country, will distort their market. WTO has been asking India to reduce its agriculture subsidy, which we have not done. We'll discuss that topic a bit later. WTO also has a concern about intellectual property rights record of India. Intellectual property rights include issues such as copyright, for example. When you make a certain invention, when you make a certain discovery, you have spent a lot of research, a lot of money into that. Others should not be allowed to copy that. The government should make enough laws, enough stringent laws to make it impossible for anyone else to copy. So your intellectual property should be protected by the government. But as per WTO, as per countries such as US, India does not do a good job here. Pirated copies, copyrights are not that respected in India. They are violated in India at a very large scale, and the Indian laws are not strict enough for that. We'll discuss this issue also much later on. Then there are trade disputes. A lot of times, countries such as US, EU as a group have gone to WTO against India, challenging the trade practices that we have. They have challenged the government of India's subsidies, for example, being given. Indian government started giving something called the solar subsidy. The government of India said that if you make a solar panel in India using Indian products only, the government will give you some subsidy. America said this is unfair because now no one will buy American solar panel from India. Because if you buy American solar panel, you will not get the subsidy. So in effect, India is not giving national treatment to American products. So they went to the WTO against us. It became a trade dispute. All these are minute issues that the WTO handles, where all the countries go and try and manage that and fight against each other. There have been impacts of globalization at a large scale, some important, some positive for us, and some obviously negative. The important ones that are positive for us, much more foreign exchange than what we had earlier, which is obviously a great sign for a country like India. Export oriented growth, we have been able to export much more stuff as compared to what we used to do earlier. Better growth, better goods and services, technological advancements. As I said, we are using the same kind of technology as someone else sitting in a developed country is using. There is no difference in that sense that just because I am in India, I am not being able to use a kind of technology as some others are. If there is iPhone 16 that I am using, it is the same phone being used in America or Europe. It doesn't really make a difference. Services sector growth, India has seen huge surge in the service sector growth, IT, computer services, etc., which contribute over half of India's GDP. It has only been possible because of globalization. Companies such as TCS, Infosys earn humongous amount of profit by selling their services outside the country. At the same time, there are certain cons which have not gone down well. There is domestic competition, means domestic companies face a tough competition from outside brands. If given a choice, you would want to buy a product of a foreign brand. That has become problematic for Indian brands. There is agricultural vulnerability. Agriculture in India, because they have not adopted new technology, because they are still lagging behind, their competition is the toughest from other companies. There is rising inequality. It is proven that globalization, etc., did not give equal benefit to everyone. Some section of the society that were already rich, already powerful, already strong, got more benefit out of it as compared to others. So the inequality has risen even more. There are environmental concerns. In search for more profit, in search for making aggressive growth, we have not really looked at the environment. Cutting down of trees, deforestation, desertification, consumerism, all this is an outcome of globalization. You would see many people uh, blaming that, oh, today's generation, our food patterns have changed, our food habits has changed. What our parents used to eat, we don't eat the same stuff, we eat Western stuff. It's all because of globalization. 30 years ago, no one was having pizza or pasta or burgers in India at such a fast pace as we consume it now. Donuts, burrito, all that is available in India commonly was never a part of our culture. but because of globalization, it has entered into our lives. What have been the impacts of the LPG reforms in India? Many, many, many positive effects. Touch wood, we have never been in that situation once again where in 1991 we had just 2 weeks of money left for import. Imagine 1991, our FDI inflows were only $100 million. Compare that to 2017-18, FDI inflows have reached $30 billion. This is the data given till the time the data is given as NCERT. But if you go beyond that, the FDI inflows have increased even further. For example, in today's context, the FDI inflows have been close to $60 billion in a year now. 2018-19 foreign exchange reserves were $413 billion. All that is mainly due to the LPG reforms, the leap of faith that we took back then. Yes, there have been some negative aspects of it, there is no doubt over the fact, but we have been able to make sure that such a situation does not return. If you look at economic growth in India, our service sector, as we discussed, has been the biggest contributor of our growth, and it continues to be that. Industrial growth has not been as high as we would want, and that is why we have a situation which we call as jobless growth in India. Jobless growth means when you do have growth numbers but you do not have enough jobs, so there is still unemployment. Because amongst the three sectors, manufacturing is the one that has a potential to employ a lot of people, but because manufacturing has not picked up in India, we have seen unemployment still being very high. We have seen much improved infrastructure, much better connectivity, which is a continuous process. We have much better highways, much better connectivity now in all parts of the country, and our exports have also risen quite considerably. We export much more services than goods. If you segregate the two, our services export is always positive in nature. Our goods export is always negative. Overall, the services surplus is not able to compensate for the goods, but in terms of services, at least we are doing pretty well when it comes to export. At the same time, these have been the negative effects of economic policies of India since 1991. The disparity part, as I said, no development, no policy will impact everyone equally. There will always be a certain section of the society that will always have much more positive impact as compared to others. This is thus the nature of all the policies. There have been issues of global integration. See, when you are so connected to the world, when the entire world is one market, the problem is anything bad in one country will then lead to the same bad thing happening in other parts of the world as well. 2007-8, America had this great recession. The same happened in other parts of the world. Today, what the American Federal Reserve decides, what American stock market decides, what American president decides, has an impact on our stock market also. Just imagine that. Someone sitting in America takes a decision, it has an impact on how our stock market behaves. Because the entire world is connected, we are all one. With the global integration, there is no crisis that is confined to one country. And it's not just about the market. Look at COVID-19, started with one country and it reached every part of the world because we are so connected to each other now. There are also issues of pollution, resource exploitation around the entire world with the race to earn more and more money, earn more and more profit. Agriculture has stagnated not just in India but around the world because a lot of focus is on technology, services, etc. Jobless growth, as I told you earlier. Increasingly, now that new technology such as AI, etc. are coming in, there are always fears of people who are not skilled enough maybe having to lose their jobs. Then there's issue of rising inequality, as I said, and this is a problem with every part of the world, where the top 1% will always control most of the resources with them. And it's not just with India. It's a problem with Europe, EU, America, Australia. Every part of the world will have few individuals controlling most of the wealth and resources. You can blame it on the economic policies, but again, that has been the case every single place in the world. This is what brings us to an end of chapter 3. Very insightful, very interesting. A lot of these questions can be asked in the examination. Do join us for the 4th chapter then. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Harshmeet Singh.